everyone. I'm Jim Suazo. I'm a committee member of the Ridgewood Guild International Film Festival. And today I'm here to interview the writer and director of A Case of Blue. It's a feature-length film that has been selected to open our film festival. And it has received that honor, not just because it's such a good film, but because it has a particular connection to Ridgewood, our leafy suburb outside of Manhattan. This film is made by Dana Glazer, who's a resident of Ridgewood, and he used as his locations primarily Ridgewood, New Jersey, as well as Greenwich Village in Manhattan. So welcome, Dana.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Great. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I was born in Massachusetts, and it's kind of funny because a lot of people go, really? You don't sound like you're from Massachusetts. But yes, I was born in the Boston area, and that's where I grew up. And then I went to Bowdoin College up in Maine for my undergrad years. I was a history major with a minor in film. And then from there, I went to NYU graduate film. And I made my thesis film, won a Student Academy Award. And that got me an agent, and I did the whole Hollywood dance for a bunch of years. And then, but I still remained on this coast. And eventually in 2008, my wife and I landed here in Ridgewood, and we love it. It's our home, and we've never looked back. It's a wonderful place to live.
That's great. Now, going back to your earlier days, when did you first become interested in film? Was it as a kid or a child?
So I've been making movies since I was 9 years old. And it's been a lifelong passion. It continues to be a lifelong passion. I think every day of my life is probably a good portion of it is spent either thinking about movies I've seen, thinking about movies I want to make, or just movies in general. It's always a mixture of film and family and community. That seems to be my focal point these days.
Now, do you consider yourself more of a writer or a director?
Oh, I consider myself more of a filmmaker. Initially, when I went to Hollywood and with my Student Academy Award and did that whole thing, I was writing scripts for Hollywood. But I see myself as a storyteller first and foremost. And, the form of the storytelling is, it's become more fluid in recent years. Initially, I thought it was just purely going to be narrative feature filmmaking, but it's moved to documentary filmmaking. It's moved to, writing poetry, taking pictures. I mean, anything that's creative for me that tells a story is important. It's a way of communicating with people and sharing what my feelings are, how I see the world, and engaging other people in ways that storytelling is so powerful.
Now, our film festival attracts student filmmakers as well as professionals. What advice would you have for young filmmakers?
Perseverance. Making films is incredible. It's a lifelong pursuit, and there's never a point where it's like, oh, well, I know it all now. But as you go along, you learn more and more. And Malcolm Gladwell has a famous quote about in order to become professional or proficient at something, you need to put in about 10,000 hours of work. And I think that applies to filmmaking as it does for most things. But it is such an endeavor. And for filmmaking, it's not just about making the films. It used to be that you would, if you were lucky enough to be in Hollywood, you'd make the film and then they'd, bankroll you for another film, and you have to worry about the promotion of it or what have you. Now it's so much about getting your film out there and making sure that it's seen. And so a big part of it is not just the making of the film, but also the other part of it, which is the finishing it and then the marketing and distribution of it. And that's a whole, I'm as a filmmaker, it's something I'm continually learning about even at this point. So I think that making films that speak to you, that come from a deep part of who you are, is important. And also understanding that not everybody may necessarily want to see that film, and thinking about, well, is that a film that you want to share with others? You want a large appeal, or is it something that you want to be just private and personal? Sometimes those are uh, they're few and far between, and sometimes you can bridge that gap. But I think that the most important thing, because we're only here for a certain limited amount of time on this planet, is to make things that speak to you and that are important to you, that are the issues that are important to you, things that you feel important about, expressing them in the ways that you can. That's what's important.
Well, that's a perfect transition to talking about the particular film, A Case of Blue. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of that, how you came up with the idea, why you decided to pursue it.
Well, I came up with the idea originally in 2003, when I went and took an art class in New York City at the Student Arts League. And when I was there, because I thought, hey, let me try my hand at drawing a little bit, doing a life drawing class. It was something I thought was interesting to do. And when I was there was a woman in the class who she wasn't exactly the spitting image of a woman from my romantic youth, but she was reminiscent enough that it kind of messed with my head a little bit. And so I wrote down the story in my on the computer, and then I had no idea what to do with it. And so I put it away. And then in 2017, I was I was at a family wedding in the Boston area, and my parents were there, and I had a heart to heart with my mother, and my father was having a very difficult time, as one of his dearest friends and a law partner of his was dying of pancreatic cancer. And as my mother and I had a fairly sobering conversation about about retirement and downsizing and all sorts of things that are a little frightening for her and unnerving for me to hear. And as I was driving back to Ridgewood, that story that I had put away so many years earlier suddenly came back to me. And by the time I arrived back in town, I had basically crafted the shape of the larger story based on that original event. And so it's interesting how I write whenever I come up with an idea. I have notebooks that have ideas in them, and I write them down. And you never know when they will suddenly emerge and reach fruition. Sometimes it can take 14 years, as this one did.
Wow. Now, tell us what came first. I assume it's the script, or is it getting a producer? Is it getting financing? How did it work in the case of The Case of Blue?
Right. So as I said, I came up to the idea. I conceptualized the whole story, and that was in June. By the end of July, I had a solid working draft of the script. And at that point, I then went and shared it with lots of people that I know, including some friends in town and some performers, and really tried to make sure that it was as strong as it could be, with the plan that a year from then, I would be shooting the film, which is actually, for filmmaking, a pretty quick turnaround. Sometimes these things can take a long time, especially if you're looking for large bankable actors. And I decided at that point that I wanted to make a film that was personal, that involved the Ridgewood community as much as I could, and that I do it in a fairly quick fashion. So in the terms of the timeline, in October, I was introduced to Scott Rosenfeld, who has produced all sorts of movies that you would recognize, including Home Alone and Mystic Pizza. And we hit it off, and he really liked the script. And from that point on, we were working on developing the script a little further, on raising some money, on bringing the crew together. And I had a financier who agreed to put the bulk of the film money together for it, but I still had to raise money. So then there was the involvement of, I had a bunch of different fundraisers online, offline, all sorts of different things. We had a big party to raise money. And then in July of 2018, we were shooting. So it was amazing. And then a year later, the film was completed in terms of post-production. So it's actually a pretty quick turnaround. I always thought of it as being a 3-year process, but because of COVID, it's becoming a little bit lengthier. But that's sort of the shape of the whole thing.
And speaking of the financing, if you're allowed to talk about it, how much did this film cost to make? How long did it take to shoot, et cetera?
Good question. The budget is not something that I feel comfortable with sharing at this point. But let me just say that it wasn't an enormous amount of money. It was enough to get it done, but also not quite enough to do it in a lavish fashion. So there was a lot of creativity that was involved in terms of trying to make sure that every dollar that went into the film was up on the screen. And that was a bit of a process to do that. So he had to be somewhat creative. And that's, I think that makes movies better in a lot of ways. I think that, when you think about Star Wars, which had all things considered for its time, a fairly small budget, and there had to be a lot of creativity, as opposed to The Phantom Menace, where Lucas had all the money he ever wanted and all the control he ever wanted. I think the results are two different things. And so I think that there is benefit to having those limitations, because it does force you to think about things in creative ways. And certainly that's what happened with this film.
And did that affect where you shot the film or some of the decisions you made with regard to locations?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. So the film, I didn't answer what you asked before, which was what was the shooting days? They were 18. And I was very aware that after the 18th day, it was like Cinderella's carriage. It would all turn back into a pumpkin. So there was an incredible intensity to make sure that everything was packed into those days, and I was as prepared as I could be for those days as possible. So I storyboarded. We had rehearsals. We had locations. I tried to emphasize locations around Ridgewood, and in fact, what's really interesting is that one of the key locations originally, the concept was the Ridgewood, the New York Student Arts League, and I went back to the Arts League in New York City, and it's interesting about memory. Memory is about, I think, 30% of reality, the way we remember things. And I had romanticized my memory of this room that I had been in. And so I was somewhat disappointed when I went there. And then I was like, well, where else am I going to shoot an art studio? And it just so happened that I was like, oh, I'll take a look at the Ridgewood, the Ridgewood Art Institute, not expecting very much. And I went in and I was stunned at how incredible and beautiful it was inside. And what I learned was that the same architect who had originally designed the Student Arts League had done the Ridgewood Art Institute. But the Student Arts League in New York City had become what had originally been designed was affected by the fact that I think there were some buildings that were put in front of it that damaged the northern light, which really a studio likes to have, for the ideal kind of artistic experience. And the studio here in Ridgewood has this still. And so I was amazed by it. So in the film, you see Richard, and he walks out of his home, goes to the train station, walks into what looks to be the facade of the building of of the Student Arts League, and then when he enters, he's actually back in Ridgewood. That's the creativity of shooting. We also shot at the tennis club, and originally there was going to be a scene taking place in Central Park with these two characters sitting on a park bench. And that would have been problematic because New York City is hard to control. But what I realized when we were shooting at the tennis club was that there's a long road that swings down through some wooded area leading to the tennis club, and it was a great stand-in for Central Park. And so we stuck a park bench there, and it looked fantastic. And so that's the kind of creativity that you need when you're shooting. But then there were other locations that you couldn't replicate anywhere else, like, for example, Cafe Wa and Cafe Reggio and Jones Street and Washington Square Park. Those are places that were important to me, and I had to really fight to include because there are budgetary restrictions in terms of what you can and can't do, especially when you're shooting in New York City. It can get to be very expensive very quickly. So there were things that that I fought for, and then there were things that we shot in Central Park for something separate, not that park bench scene, but something else. And then we ran into a problem of weather, and then we ended up having to shoot in Fort Greene in Brooklyn and connecting the two parks seamlessly. So there's some elasticity in terms of using locations when you shoot a film. We also shot at Van Son Park and at the Carousel specifically, and that was a really interesting experience because it took about 3 months to get access to that carousel because it is a county property. It's not a private one. So there was all sorts of paperwork and all sorts of things that we had to deal with. So that was a challenge into itself. And and then we shot here in Ridgewood. Oh goodness, what is the name of the street? I'm blanking on the name of the street, but down near the high school. And we shot the interior of one house and 3 doors down the exterior of another. And we married them together. So when you're watching the film, you're thinking that it's one and the same. And when I went to visit the house from the exterior, because Catherine Schmidt, she and Joseph graciously donated that for the use of the film. It was kind of odd to walk into her house and go, oh wait, we're not back in the inside of the other house. So it kind of plays mind tricks on you a little bit. But that's the fun of shooting film and attaching things and creating a reality when in fact the reality isn't the way it actually is.
Well, it really, like you say, it came out seamlessly. Well done. Tell us a little bit about just what's happened since the film has been completed. Have you put it into other festivals? What's your experience been?
Well, the film won 2 festivals so far. The Chelsea Film Festival, it won a special jury prize as well as an award for actor Steven Schnetzer. And then there's a film festival that was Brooklyn-based called Imagine This Women's Film Festival, which is interesting. I was wondering if my name being Dana, if they actually realized that I was a male. I think I had to, when they accepted me into this film festival, I sent them a letter saying, thank you so much for your acceptance. Just want to make sure that you do know that I am of the male he variety. And they say, oh yes, we know. The film won that film festival as well as Best Actor and Actress Award for Annapurna Surum and Steven Schnetzer. So it's been fun so far.
That's great. Well, we wish you the best of luck in our festival as well. We're really happy to have your film being part of it, Dana. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Jim. And I only wish that we could be doing this in person. But we get the cards that we're given, and we make the most of it, right?
That's absolutely true. All right.
Very good.
Thank you again.
Thank you.